The first segment is about Zillow. You came to me earlier this week, late last week. You said, Chris, agents are buzzing. There's a new controversy. There's a change that Zillow announced that is creating a lot of negative feedback online, a lot of people that are angry, a lot of people that are neutral, a lot of people that are happy. Talk to me about Zillow. What did they do? Let's kick off the show with Zillow before we get to the ads.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks for the setup there, Chris. And I think, John, if you want to pull the slides up for me real quick, thank you. So essentially what Zillow has done, when we see Zillow updating or making changes or innovating, as what we like to refer to ourselves as Switzerland, we always try to take an objective view at what they're doing and sort of provide our own insight. This is an issue that a lot of agents have been reacting to very viscerally. And what we're seeing is Zillow now owns properties. I think everyone, if you're not aware of that, they have this service called Zillow Offers in which they're buying properties, I think in 4 or 6 cities now. And what they're now beginning to do is that when you search for homes, this is an experiment. They're probably not rolling out this to their entire platform. But when you search for homes in one of those areas, Chris, they're going to prioritize the properties that they actually own. So from an agent's perspective, if you're a premier agent or if you're promoting your listings on Zillow, they're experimenting, kind of essentially taking that top placement from you to highlight the properties that they actually own. Now, why this is probably causing the reaction, we'll get into in a second here, but why this is causing such a visceral reaction is we know, we've seen this, Chris, with different studies. If you look at the top search results on Google, the percentage of clicks that the number 1, the number 2, the number 3 get, it is the lion's share of activity. So I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing people feel like, you know what it actually reminds me of, Chris? This is not even, it wasn't even in our show notes. It reminds me a little bit of the Microsoft Internet Explorer strategy. This is when Netscape rolled out and they were taking over the world. Everyone was using the Netscape browser, Navigator. And then Microsoft said, you know what, we own the hardware, we own the software. Every PC we ship is going to come with Internet Explorer. And then all of a sudden, Netflix essentially evaporated what feels like overnight because they controlled, and this is, I think, the feedback, they controlled the entire pipeline. So Netscape couldn't do anything about it.
So basically, Jimmy, just to recap what Zillow did, is they are putting the homes that they own above all the other homes for sale. And what you're suggesting is that by doing that and by pushing down the search results of the listings of the people watching, it, in theory, is going to create less traction, less leads, less engagement. There's a funny joke on the kind of conference speaking circuit that the best place to hide a dead body is page 2 of Google.
Yeah.
And I read this other article about Amazon doing the same thing. Amazon is going to these different manufacturers and they're saying, hey, if you will let us white label your pillow, white label your bread, white label your paper towels, if we can call your paper towels Amazon paper towels, in exchange for that, you got to give us a good price, but we will put you at the top of the searches for paper towels on Amazon. So this is a pretty common strategy. And actually, the other thing I remembered, I want to ask how is the industry reacting? How are agents reacting? But it also reminds me, Jimmy, of when I was working at Realtor.com, we had an ad unit called Featured Home. And it literally was the homes at the top.
Yeah.
And the reason they were cost money to advertise was because they got 5 times to 8 times more clicks than the homes below it. Yeah. So there's certainly data out there that would back up the claim that putting the Zillow-owned listings up top should, in theory, hurt the results for everybody else. So what was the reaction? I know you were monitoring Facebook groups and looking at some of the chatter.
I'm monitoring the water cooler chat right now. People are, giving feedback on this topic. It's similar in line with what we saw. We saw people basically saying, this person said this, and I'll react to it. Robert Mason said, just another reason I discourage my clients from using Zillow. Now, I'm going to focus on this particular point of feedback because I think the feedback is what you guys expect. I hate Zillow. Zillow sucks. Zillow's ruining our industry. We sort of, we are lambs to the slaughter. That's sort of the general feedback. But this individual says, just another reason I discourage my clients from using Zillow. Let's be real about this. That's not a strategy. Your clients, Zillow didn't advertise in the Super Bowl this year, Chris, but they take out a lot of money on mass media. Like, you cannot stop, nor should you try. It's a fool's errand. It's actually insane to think that you can control consumers' behavior. You should not even attempt to prevent a consumer from using a website they love to use. This has always been our argument about Zillow, Chris. Like, people like to bash Zillows to their consumers, but like, this is something they like. They don't hate Zillow. They like Zillow. So I think the positioning of this really matters, Chris. And here's what I'll say, Spencer, because I think it's this strategy, Chris. You shared this article with me. It was really helpful. Spencer went on Mad Money with
Yeah,
our boy.
just the CEO of Zillow.
Yeah.
You know, their stock went down a little bit recently because of getting into this business, right? It's a little bit expensive. It doesn't have as good of margins as, selling digital ads does, what they've done in the past. So what did the CEO of Zillow say about why they're doing this? Because I do think a lot of times you can get a lot of feedback from the visceral reaction of the agents,
Yeah.
but Spencer is the guy running the company. He's supposed to kind of tell the truth, right? They're a publicly traded company. So what did he say about it?
Yeah, this is his exact quote, and it's actually a wonderful way of thinking about it. He said, "We think of it like Netflix going into originals." So essentially, he's saying we're using our data as an advantage to build the muscle memory, the DNA, to be creative. And he thinks there's a big opportunity for Zillow to become a massive player in the space of actually owning homes. So what he's saying is Zillow making the transition to buying real estate is the exact same thing as Netflix making the transition into creating original content.
Yeah, well, I think part of the reason he made that analogy is because Netflix, through their original programming and by hiring all these actors and producing all this content, they're doing it at an enormous loss in the short term.
Yeah.
In the long term, it might be the right play. And I think that's part of the reason he used the analogy, is because Netflix was spending $1 billion on this, and they paid this comedian this ridiculous amount of money that the studios couldn't compete with.
Yeah.
So short term, it definitely is a loser financially. Long term, obviously, is yet to be seen. But like, if I'm watching, Jimmy, here's what I really care about. No offense. What do I do?
Yeah.
What can I do about this? Like, should I change what I do? Should I double down on Zillow? Should I cancel Zillow? Like, we've had client after client come to us, and their bill has gotten so high that they've had to relook at it and say, man, that's a lot of money I could do something else with. What's the opportunity cost of that huge bill? Or if just morally and ethically, like I think about the iPhone App Store and I think about Amazon for authors of books like me, there is a too low they can go. You know what I mean? Like, yes, you're a little bit of a slave to the App Store because that's where everybody gets their apps, but Apple gives you 30% and people seem to, they rake their 30%. That seems fair. Same thing with Amazon. You're really not going to sell a lot of books without Amazon, but if they took the margins to a penny, authors would figure out something else. So what can agents do about these changes if they're mad, if they want to try something different?
Yeah, so I have a question for everyone who's watching right now, tuning in live on our Facebook page. What is the only profitable airline in the last 40 years? Any guesses? We'll see what comes in the chat here in a second, Chris. Here's, before I answer that question, what you can do about it, because it's actually the way we think about everything here, Curator, is like, this is the environment, this is a reality, how can you react to it? It's important to point out that your Netflix example, the top 5 shows on Netflix, Chris, The Office, Friends, Parks and Rec, Grey's Anatomy, and New Girl, which I don't know what that is. I know what the rest of them are. Those are none of those are Netflix originals. None of them are.
Yeah, but their most watched movie of all time, Bird Box, is.
Yeah. So you start to see, like, there's this sort of old guard versus new guard dynamic that's happening. Now, Spencer and the team at Zillow, obviously being a publicly traded company, they have to provide information to potential investors about what their plan is. And one of the things that they said in their recent quarterly report that really sort of shook me to my core when I was reading it is, like, they have plans to own a shitload of houses. Like, this is not an experiment that they're simply doing just to see what happens. They made this sort of forward-facing statement, Chris, where they said, if Zillow Offers was available in all top 200 metro areas, that half of all the homes for sale in the U.S. would be eligible for a Zillow Offers. So like I'm not going to get into this whether or not Zillow's good or bad or evil. They're a business, and their job is to make money, and their job is to to continue to raise their revenue to begin to drive earnings back for their investors. Like Zillow is not your friend, but they're not your enemy either. They're just a business. Now, what you can do about it, and what we believe at Curator, is we believe in a very simple question, and I think I'll see what people said about this. And yeah, Debbie Wirtz is on point. It is Southwest. Southwest is the only profitable airline over the last 40 years. There's been some airlines who have been profitable at times, but Southwest is consistently profitable every single year, Chris. And here's the reality. You can only buy Southwest airline tickets on southwest.com. Travelocity, Expedia, Orbitz, Cheap Flights, Google Flights. I didn't even Google even sells flights. Booking, Kayak. You can't buy Southwest on any of these sites. And what's the takeaway here is that Southwest's brand is so strong. Their marketing is so on point. Their service really fulfills upon the customer's expectations. They don't need to use other services. And if you're willing to invest in your brand, invest in your marketing, invest in the customer experience, then you're not dependent on what Zillow needs to do to keep their shareholders happy. And if you're confused by that, you're missing a huge opportunity here, Chris.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that resonates with me is quite simply, if you're not going to do that, you got to do all these other things. You got to go to the consumer direct. You got to have a great web experience. You got to have great customer service. You got to do branding. You know what I mean? You got to tell the little jokes on the intercom, which I personally not a fan of, but I understand. Like profit matters. That was my point. Like if it no longer becomes profitable to invest in Amazon or iTunes, developers and authors are going to be out. So Jimmy, how would you sum this up? Like, what's the bottom line? How, you there was something we talked about this week that you said that really resonated with me, and I think it sums it all up. But how would you encapsulate this entire talk track?
Well, I have two very simple takeaways. One is a quote from you, which I think everyone needs to hear, because you said this during Excellence a few years back. You said, all the people who use Zillow use Facebook more, use Instagram more, use YouTube more. So let's be clear about that. But the way I would describe it and the way I would sum this up, Chris, is Zillow is a tax you pay for being bad at marketing.
Say that again, Jimmy. Say that one more time.
Zillow is a tax you pay for being bad at marketing. So if you're unable to build your brand, you're unable to get great at marketing, you're unable to differentiate yourself in a crowded industry, you're going to have to pay a tax to compete or reach consumers. But as we talked about with Southwest, like you can go direct to consumers. Now the reality, Chris, is this. And the last thing, we'll go into the Super Bowl ads we have to cover and the winners. There's a term they use in Silicon Valley. They always come up with these stupid phrases, but I actually like this one. It's called coopetition, which is cooperating and being a competitor. Like that's what it is. Zillow is your competitor, but they're also sort of like, you kind of need them if you're trying to reach consumers or trying to reach them in a meaningful way. So that you can work with these companies as you're building up your brand. You should not make an emotional decision on that topic, Chris.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of a medium too, where you can have your listings on Zillow so that your sellers and your customers are appeased. But that doesn't mean you have to spend $100,000 a month advertising there, right? Yeah. You can leverage that money going through social. I think the nice thing is when the TVs and the newspapers and the radio had the monopoly, there wasn't another option. And I think if you feel like whether it's Amazon or Zillow or these companies are too big to fail, at least in this modern era, through social, through digital, through Facebook Live, you can bypass if you need to.